I didn't just come back to see family. Lately, I've been sensing that there's something wrong with the Speed Force.
I didn't know anyone else was affected.
The Speed Force is beyond repair.
What did you do? Easy peasy.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This is going to be my breakdown of The Flash Season 6, Episode 14 trailer video. Wally West is back, and the Speed Force has gone completely crazy. What has Barry done now? They're referencing a very specific storyline because the title of the episode is The Death of the Speed Force, and they just did that in the Flash Rebirth comics, so I'll explain what that was and how they're probably going to change that for the TV show. We also got the Reverse Flash post-credit scene from last night's episode with Grodd. I'll explain what's going on with that and the return of the Reverse Flash, and the idea that the Dragon Ball Gogeta fusion of Barry and Grodd is somehow a teaser for the coming of Red Death eventually, since Red Death is a fusion speedster. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get everything. We're doing a Flash Ring giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your biggest theory about what's going on with the Speed Force on the video. So starting with the footage first, then I'll talk about Red Death and the Reverse Flash post-credit scene. So Wally West comes back to visit the Flash family because he hasn't been around in a while. The actor left the show a couple seasons ago because he just wanted to go off and do other things. He didn't want to play Wally West anymore. So if you wonder why Wally West hasn't been on the Flash TV show for a while, why he wasn't part of Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's just because the actor left the show and they didn't have room for him in the budget because it's really expensive to do multiple speedsters in episodes. Kind of a bummer, but at least he's coming back for this storyline. I don't know how many episodes it's going to last, if it's just going to be this one episode or if he'll be back a couple times this season. But he says he senses that something hasn't been right with the Speed Force since Crisis on Infinite Earths ended. Since almost everyone, including Oliver's mother Moira Queen, seemed to have knowledge of Crisis on Infinite Earths after the merged Earth Prime episodes. I'm assuming Wally West has a basic understanding of Crisis, but maybe he doesn't totally understand what they did, because they did spend a lot of time in the Speed Force. We got that awesome scene with the Ezra Miller Justice League Flash crossover. We'll have to wait a couple more years for that Flash movie for them to pay that off. They're still making the Flash movie, but he's doing Fantastic Beasts first, so if you wonder why there is no Flash movie yet, that's why, because they're doing those Harry Potter movies. Also, when Wally West is talking about something not being right, feeling right with the Speed Force, they show you the scene of the fake Iris closing the door on the Central City citizen, meaning they're going to continue that plot, like Team Flash will start to figure out that that's not the regular Iris. Something during the episode happens, there's this big crime during Jitters that they all go to investigate. Cisco and Wally West are there at the crime scene with Barry and Joe investigating. Cisco whips out one of his Ghostbusters devices. I can't tell what kind of readings this device is giving off. This looks kind of like a radioactive symbol, but without hearing Cisco's dialogue talking about special readings, you don't really know what it is that they're measuring here. They keep talking about the Speed Force being all crazy, then they flash back to the scene on Leon U in the prison where Barry's Speed Force started acting up when he was getting really upset about Oliver dying, but he sort of wrote it off like some weird glitch. And I can't tell if this is Allegra tackling Nash Wells in a different scene or Cisco tackling someone just because of the long hair, because it's their stunt doubles. Sometimes in trailers you might notice you can spot the actors' stunt doubles. Sometimes they'll use the footage from before they've added the digital face swapping technology, because the actors won't do the dangerous stunts. Like if there's a really big physical fight that they have to perform, it'll be one of the stunt doubles. Barry claims he doesn't know anyone else was affected. He's probably talking about post-crisis Speed Force changes. He probably starts to notice more on his own, too, that something isn't quite right with the power, sort of teeing up this conversation with Wally. Wally seems like he's really pissed and says the Speed Force is beyond repair, just completely losing it. Then in a different scene, Barry hooks himself up to the Tachyon enhancer from way back when Reverse Flash helped him design it so that he could beat Zoom back in Season 2. Then they show you the repeat scene of him when he saw himself dying during Crisis on Infinite Earths, just running as fast as he could into the Speed Force. More on that in a second, but I think this is also tangentially related to the Reverse Flash post-credit scene. So there's also the return of Godspeed and some Red Death stuff coming up too. So a lot of speedster-heavy stuff happening the back half of the season for those of you that felt like the early part of the season was really speedster light. This is sort of that X-Files phenomenon where they do the one-off episodes and then the mythological episodes where they get into the mythology of the Speed Force and speedsters. Those, to me, tend to be the more interesting episodes. The whole deal here has been Nash Wells hallucinating the other versions of Harrison Wells from the multiverse. Obviously, we know the multiverse exists because we saw it in that post-credit scene from Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 5. But for whatever reason, none of the other characters know, and Cisco says that the laws of physics have changed a little bit, so his breaching ability doesn't work the way it used to. So it's not like they can just breach to another world and see if everyone's still alive. What it seems like they're implying here is that it's either the other versions of Harrison Wells connected to Nash Wells through the multiverse somehow, through Crisis on Infinite Earths, and his abilities as Pariah. He supposedly lost them post-Crisis, but maybe there's some sort of residual connection to them. But it seems like it's only happening for him in his mind. And when he finally starts hallucinating Sherlock Wells during the episode, and he then turns into Reverse Flash saying he is coming, the way they're playing it in this scene is as if he's having a waking nightmare, so it's only experiencing for him, and it's something that his own mind is generating. Like, Sherlock Wells wasn't a mean person. He wouldn't act like this. He wouldn't be doing this on his own. So I don't think that this is the real Sherlock Wells that's actually telling him Reverse Flash is coming. I think it's Nash Wells' own consciousness telling him in the form of Sherlock Wells and Reverse Flash that Reverse Flash is coming. But they're getting really crazy with the mythology, and this isn't necessarily a comic book storyline that they're doing for Nash Wells and Reverse Flash. So they're just completely off the page, so wide open to theory crafting. The whole idea with the Death of the Speed Force storyline in the comics, though, this actually gets really interesting because it's a big Zoom storyline from the Flash Rebirth that involves Wally West and Barry Allen, but it's the ginger version of Wally West, is that the Death of the Speed Force arc starts when Barry and Wally in this sort of Flash War storyline run so fast that they break the Speed Force. That's right, if it were even possible to break the Speed Force, they do it. And what happens, though, is they find that there are other cosmic forces besides the Speed Force and the negative Speed Force that coexist in the same spaces. There's the Speed Force, the negative Speed Force, the Sage Force, which gives people mental powers, the Strength Force, which gives you increased strength, the Still Force, which controls entropy and inertia. Grodd gains control over that. And then there's the Forever Force, which gives you control over time. That's the way they explain Zoom's speed powers in the comics, because in the comics, Zoom isn't a speedster. He just moves through the spaces and time, so it appears like he's moving really fast, but really he's just manipulating the timeline. But the whole idea is that when all these other cosmic forces come into play, they start to eat away at the Speed Force, so that's why they call it the Death of the Speed Force. And they have to find a way to get people to stop using the other cosmic forces, but then Barry becomes the most powerful version of the Flash that he's ever become, and Wally West sort of becomes a new version of Dr. Manhattan for the DC Universe. That's kind of what they're calling him now. He's sort of like this cosmic Dr. Manhattan figure. Just to follow up on the Red Death questions that I got on my last episode 13 video, because they do the Dragon Ball Gogeta fusion with Grodd and Barry coming together, a lot of people were wondering if that's sort of a setup teaser to explain the concept for how Red Death can exist on the TV show. Because in the comics, Red Death is the fusion of Barry in a version of Batman who went into the Speed Force, fused, then came back out as one being, with Barry's consciousness being trapped while Batman was controlling the body. We got a teaser for Red Death last season in Season 5. They just mentioned that the Flash had faced Red Death at some point, so at some point in the future we would see him. So if they're going to do a comic book accurate version, or as accurate as possible, it would have to be one speedster fused with another person to become that Red Death character. But the big question was who would Barry be fusing with to make the Red Death character, or who would be the other speedster that someone else fused with? So everyone, let me know in the comments, do you think that they're going to do a version of Red Death that's going to be a fusion, just like we saw Grodd and Barry do Dragon Ball style later this season? But if you're wondering, Godspeed is also coming back too later this season. They'll probably explain what was going on with him way back in Season 6, Episode 1. My initial assumption is that that would be something tied to the Black Hole storyline, because they kind of seem like the big bads for the back half of the season, but they also made it seem like he was traveling back in time, so it would have to be someone from the future manipulating Godspeed's stuff, trying to send them back in time to fight Barry. So we're kind of back into a time travel plot. We'll just have to see how it plays out, if we spot any other big Easter eggs or teasers, especially when Wally comes back. But there's going to be a 2-week break, so it's not going to be till March before we see this episode. Everyone, click here for all my Avengers Infinity Saga deleted scenes that I just posted, and click here for that brand new Flash Season 6 Episode 13 video. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.